I don't see Catherine. Okay, but it's okay. I'll take your faces. And
Prof, sorry, I'm battling to get my video to go on, but I think it's an issue of Wi-Fi. I am trying to move around, but unfortunately it's pending. It's like hanging.
It's okay. All right, I'm about to take pose. Okay, Catherine, you let me know when you're ready to join.
We can start. My face may just appear, so don't get a shock. But as soon as it goes on, I think it'll just pop up because it's just hanging at the moment.
Okay. Hi, Mbuso.
Two things, just a quick reminder, your space starts in 3 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Mbuso.
And then I just got a call from Vodacom to just remind you to look over your.
Look over what?
I muted her. I think she didn't realize she was not on mute. Prof, I muted you, so when you're done, you can join.
I'll look so that I go together.
the youth around 18 or 17, and if they are happy,
All right, colleagues, I'm not sure whether I should start. I suspect we have to start. Okay. Di, should we? I think we should.
Yes,
Others
Prof.
will
Yes,
join
Prof.
us. Right.
Yes, Prof. Thanks.
In just a moment.
We can't hear you.
Prof, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, guys. Right. Welcome to the Social Justice Cafe of the Center for Social Justice at Stellenbosch University. There is a Senegalese saying that what leads you to darkness can also teach you how to come out on the other side. Will the world learn how to come out of the 75-year-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict, particularly following the Hamas attack on Israeli citizens and soldiers on October 7, and Israel's sustained bombardment and blockading of Gaza since then? What does this mean for war, peace, and children's rights? Indeed, what do wars and the legality plus morality of the way these wars are prosecuted today, be it in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or other places such as the Ukraine, Sudan, and the Congo, among others, mean for children's rights? What role can civil society play, particularly in response to the escalation that has seen children being kidnapped, killed, maimed, orphaned, and exposed to immense trauma that comes from being exposed to the darkest forms of cruelty in Israel and Palestine, particularly since October 7. Another African proverb says, children are the reward of life. While in Zulu and Siswati, we say having children is an act of self-extension. Can this painful phase in humanity's history be a catalyst for a sustainable solution to war and peace that centers children's rights as articulated in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC? Can this bring sustainable peace in Palestine and elsewhere in the world? Hamas's bloody attack on Israeli citizens and soldiers on October 7, 2023, which left 1,200 dead, while over 200, mostly civilians, including children, were taken as hostages, shook the world beyond imagination. Israel's immediate, egregiously ruthless retaliatory action that has left over 14,000 Palestinians, among them children, 500 children, 53 journalists, and over 50 health workers dead, and thousands displaced from destroyed buildings, including hospitals and schools, has left the world horrified while raising countless legality and morality questions. For me, the morality question was, do we get involved? First, it was a personal question. Later, it became a question for the University of Stellenbosch. I started wrestling with the morality question of getting involved long or shortly before October 7. During the One Young World Summit in Belfast, we had a keynote address delivered by Queen Rania of Jordan, who urged us, as we gathered from all over the world, most of us being young leaders, to do something about the plight of Palestinians, for being locked in a human open prison with no rights that other humans have. That was the 30th of September. Little did we know that 7 days later, the world would be left in shock after the strike by Hamas. The question for me was, should I write about it? Should I engage about it in the social media pages? Knowing that when you get involved in the Palestinian question, you are immediately accused of being anti-Semitic. But you're also not free from those who support Palestine, because unless you support everything without reservations, then you are regarded as anti-Palestine. I had experienced this before when I was invited to go and speak at the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Durban a few years ago. I was approached by BDS not to go, and when I refused to go, I was cancelled. The organization even tried to stop me from presenting the Ahmed Kathrada first public lecture. And of course, Kathrada would not have any of that, and the event proceeded. Once I came to Stellenbosch University, BDS had an event where we had to discuss again the Palestinian question. I was invited to be one of the speakers. This time I was approached by the Jewish community, including the Jewish Board of Deputies, not to go. I engaged with colleagues and explained that it was important that we hear each other, because through hearing each other, we might just find some common ground. And from that common ground, we might be able to then isolate what it is that we disagree on and find ways to address what we disagree on in a manner that ensures justice for all. Not just justice for some, not just justice as just us, but justice for everyone involved. So this social justice cafe has had similar challenges around should we go forward or should we not go forward. But its purpose is to simply provide a platform to discuss war, peace, and children's rights, the role of civil society. We intend to reflect on the global pursuit of peace in the face of internecine wars and conflict. Children's rights and the role of civil society can play in turning the situation around in line with the objectives of Sustainable Development Goal number 16, insofar as it talks about peace and justice. Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which talks to hunger. Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which is about advancing equality. And all of our conversations in the Social Justice Cafe are about the pursuit of social justice. And I hope that as we deal with the conversation today, we will be reminded that this year is the 75th anniversary, not just of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but it's the 17th anniversary of what we regard as the International Bill of Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, Eleanor Roosevelt had thought that war and everything ugly that goes with war would be behind us, and that justice, including social justice, would be humanity's reward. Yes, major wars such as the First and Third World War are no longer an everyday challenge, but we know that we live in a state of unpeace, as Mark Leonard says. And the Palestinian flare-up is possibly an opportunity to think about how do we attain peace? And even if there are wars, how are these wars dealt with in a manner that is consistent with morality, in a manner that is consistent with international law, particularly humanitarian law that regulates how wars should be fought, how civilians should be protected, and how children should not be harmed. So with us are 3 key experts. You have seen their names as we advertise them, but I will still summarize who they are. We have with us, the keynote address will be delivered by Ms. Catherine Constantinidis, a humanitarian, human rights defender, climate, environment, and social justice activist. The two panelists will be one, Mary Klook, Director and Board Chairperson of the Durban Holocaust Center and President of the Africa-Australia region of the World Jewish Congress. The facilitator, oh no, that's me. Forget about that. The other panelist is Zubeida Jaffer, a highly world-celebrated journalist, author, and in her own right, human rights activist. All of them have expressed views on this matter. That's why we thought it is best that they come and share these views in this room. Just lastly, I have found that there are three views on this matter. Those who think that Palestinians deserve their freedom, self-determination in all of us, and Israelis deserve what all human beings deserve, and that the idea is that there should be a two-state solution, and that all lives should count equally, and no civilians should be harmed. There are those who think because of the failure to end Israeli occupation in Palestine, then organizations such as Hamas are justified to harm, and the harm that occurred on October 7 is justified. You've seen that on the videos, I don't want to mention it. And then the last view is Israel has a right to defend itself. Whatever happens is collateral damage. But either people in Palestine are either supporters of Hamas or collateral damage or human shields. And that's the view that has been expressed by a representative of Palestine in the United Nations. I'm hoping that in this room we'll get a full spectrum of possible views, but more importantly, to center children in their human rights in the solutions. Thank you. Let us start by hearing Ms. Catherine Constantinidis. Each one of our colleagues has 15 minutes. Catherine, you have the floor now.
Thank you so very, very much. And thank you for the honor of being able to talk to you today and to share this panel with all of you. I'd like to open by perhaps sharing a beautiful quote that always sits with me. And that's the quote by our very own Tata Madiba that says, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children." And now today I'd like to also speak to you not only as a human rights defender, as a humanitarian, but also as a mother, as a child, a guardian, a friend, and a member of my very own community here in South Africa and my greater community of people that I'm connected with by a shared set of values and shared set of humanity. Now, I think that a conversation around children within this context of war, peace, and children's rights and the role of civil society is so important. And it's important because, as you alluded to earlier, the Convention on the Rights of the Child that were adopted and open for signature, and they were ratified by the General Assembly, Article 15, Article 19 specifically, and Article 30, which I will share in brief shortly, really do create a ring-fenced idea of the protection of our children, especially in the conflict and in the context of what we see playing out right now. Now, today is a very important day. As mentioned, it is the International Day of Solidarity with the people of Palestine. And I think that there is no person that could argue that the world is truly in a dark place. Fundamentally, we have lost the set of values that we should stand by. We constantly ask what kind of world we want to live in, but how often do we ask what kind of people do we want to be in that world that we're living in? What is our humanity? What are our shared values? And Prof. Madonsela and I had a brief conversation just after the 7th of October, literally perhaps a few days thereafter. And we spoke specifically about this because it's not just because of what happened early in October that has made us think about these things, but we truly need to identify what are our shared values, our common goals as humanity. And where is it that humanity is able to be the meeting point of different sets of ideologies, different sets of cultures, barriers that society has created? How do we realign and ensure that our children are always protected? How do we create a world that we can be proud of bringing our children into? You know, unfortunately, the reality is that currently Gaza has become a gravesite for children. A child is dying possibly every 10 minutes, and death certificates are being issued before birth certificates have been written. And these are the things that we need to remember. Humanity needs to be something that we all are able to not only hold as a preset of who we are as people and human beings, but it should be something that we hold everybody accountable to, that everybody should ensure that we're all making sure that we're focusing on our children, we're focusing on the protection of our women. It cannot be that in the year 2023, based off of the history that we have gone through as a human race, that we now are looking at a gravesite of 7,000 bodies that are found under rubble, and that was announced today. We cannot have that grave sites exist like this when a shared humanity is what we should be fighting for. And I think that it is important for all of us to share spaces such as this. And I thank you. I thank both Prof. Tuli Madonsela and the Social Justice Café for creating an opportunity for us to have robust discussion, share ideologies, share different points of view, but to all come to a point where we understand that our values and our belief in humanity for everyone is what needs to be the center point. It cannot be that it's a zero-sum game. It cannot be that if every red line of war is crossed and we just sit back as armchair critics. Social media is a platform and a space that I believe is both very powerful, but at the same time, it can be very dangerous. We have to be focused on what it is that we share. What are we putting out? What information that we share is verified? I think that we're at a point where so much that is going on is also, it is important for us to now take a stand and ask imperative questions that shouldn't be asked during a time of such pain, but we should reassess ourselves because perhaps we have relied far too much on technology. Perhaps we have relied far too much on, the advancement of society, that we have forgotten that we are all human together. And for me, that is the bottom line of this all. Not only as a human rights defender who has worked in war-torn countries and in places where war has existed, I've worked at the coalface of so many broken societies around the world. My work in Western Sahara, specifically another country under occupation by the Moroccan regime, the children of Western Sahara, I work intimately with families, with children. And when you see the pain and the torture of a child who is 2, 3, or 4 years old in Afghanistan, who does not understand the fundamental feeling of happiness because they have never experienced it, you can see how war is imprinted on their very DNA. We cannot allow that this continues to be a perpetual cycle of generation to generation, where we are cleaning the very DNA of our children because of what we continue to do as society. We have institutions such as the United Nations and so many others that are there to create confines in which we should be working. International humanitarian law. We can look at many different examples, but it is important for us to start to create spaces where we can have uncomfortable conversations that allow us to move forward from the point that we're at. As I mentioned also, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I would like to mention Article 15.2, where it says no restrictions may be placed on the exercise of the rights of children, and those imposed in conformity with the law and which are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of national security or public safety, public order, or the protection of public health or morals, or the protection of the rights and freedom of others. It states that parties shall take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, and educational measures to protect the child from all forms of physical, mental violence, injury or abuse, neglect, negligence, negligent treatment, maltreatment, or exploitation, including sexual abuse while in the care of parents, guardians, etc. These are just some of the rights in the articles for the Convention on the Rights of Children. I think we have forgotten that children are our most precious resource. We have allowed them to be a casualty of war on our clock, and that cannot be. Nelson Mandela, and I will end quickly because I'm not sure what my time limit, if I'm up on my time limit, but the other thing is that Nelson Mandela also said that that our children are our greatest treasure. They are the future. Those who abuse them tear at the very fabric of our society, and they weaken a nation. And I think it is important for us to understand that. It is not only the children that are both in Palestine and Israel that have been tormented by this very war, but it is the children the world over who have seen this war play out in the very palm of their hand. It is a generational impact, not just for a select few, but for a global society that is connected by the power of social media. We are seeing war in a way that we never have before because of how connected we are to technology and the advancements of technology. But it is a very painful thing to see play out, especially when you're helpless and there's so little you can do except voice your opinion, your stance. We have to be more solidified in our actions. We have to be focused on understanding where we stand as individuals, as a society, and as a nation. And I really also want to applaud the South African, the South African government, the South African community at large. We have really exercised our constitutional rights over the past few weeks, which has also made me so proud to be South African, because in many parts of the world, those that protest are arrested. Those that voice their opinions and have access to freedom of speech, it's not really so accessible. Freedom of speech is actually confined to a select few. But in South Africa, we really have seen our constitutional rights around freedom of speech and freedom to protest exercised in a way that has given hope and given us strength to carry on, especially in the realm of the horrific things that we are seeing, the horrific things we are hearing. And I think we need to be brave as human beings right now more than ever. And we really need to focus on how it is that we safeguard our children. They are indeed our future. And it is important for us that we understand the fundamentals of that. Emma Goldman once said that no one has yet realized the wealth of sympathy, the kindness and generosity that is hidden in the soul of a child. And when I've worked in many, many other places in the world, I have seen that. Even children who have been broken by society, broken by war, still find the ability to find kindness within them to share that with somebody else. They always find the ability to find the simplest way at looking at a situation. And sometimes I think that we forget that we as human beings, as adults, complicate things that should be simple. Our sets of values, what it is we stand for, justice, humanity, and being able to find common ground in order to move forward in difficult situations and challenging situations. And Prof. Madonsela, I really applaud you for the way that you have articulated very sensitive moments over the past 50 days. I take strength when I read your tweets, when I have the opportunity to have discussions with you, because I think that you have crafted a way to be able to bring different corners of society into one space and for us to have access to really powerful conversations that do move the dial. And it is important for us to remember, I know in my work specifically, and I speak for myself, the work that I do is not easy. The things that I see are tormenting. However, it takes for us to stand on the right side of history, to continue to fight, to be brave, and to dig very deep every single day to find the courage to face the atrocities we face in the corners of the world that we live in. And, you know, when we talk about war and peace and children and children's rights, we must never move far away from home either, because right here at home, our very children do not have access to their basic human rights. And these are things that I try to champion in my own way on a daily basis on the ground in communities where I work. And this for me is important. And when we look at what we're doing in our very corner, it gives us great perspective and strength to then champion what we need to champion on a global scale as a connected global society that needs to rally behind humanity, justice, and human rights. Human rights cannot be something that is just written on paper. Right now, this moment in history is defining, and we need to be able to stand on the right side of that history as history continues to write itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleague. That was Catherine Constantinides, reminding us that she's not just talking as an activist. She has been doing work in Western Sahara, which is the last colony in the African continent, but not externally colonized by another country in Africa, Morocco. And she has experienced firsthand the hopelessness of children raised in these circumstances. I think there are two questions that she's leaving us with. One is, apart from dreaming about a better world for ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, what role are we prepared to play in bringing about that world that is better for all humanity and that is fit for raising children who are healthy in every possible way and whose potential is great and who are able to experience happiness. She's also taken us through the Convention on the Rights of the Child, reminding us what kind of environment does the CRC enjoin us to create for children. She's also mentioned the fact that Nelson Mandela said about when we harm children, we tear at the foundations of the fabric of society. We're now going to move to our colleague, Zubaida Jaffer. Over to you.
I can't hear you, Zubaida. Sorry.
Unmute yourself, Zubaida. You're still muted.
The top right hand microphone next to the camera where we were. Yeah.
Julie, I thought I was the last speaker.
According to this, you are next, but it's okay if you want to be the last speaker. According to the program that was given to me, you were next. Mary, are you ready to speak?
Sure.
We can jump you around. Okay. Sorry, Zubaida, I wasn't aware of hearing. Okay. The next speaker, as I indicated, is the director of the Holocaust Center in Durban, and she is Mary Kluk. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Marinsela, and thank you to the Social Justice Café for this opportunity to participate in this panel that is dealing with war, peace, and children's rights, the role of civil society. My late mother was a teenage refugee from Nazi Germany, and I grew up meeting and hearing stories of German Jewish refugees and Holocaust survivors. Each story was unique and touched me as a human being, and they inspired me to be more involved in our world. 15 years ago, as Tuli mentioned, I founded the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center, which is dedicating to creating a more caring and just society in which human rights and diversity are respected and valued. Our mission is to raise awareness of the evils of genocide with a particular focus on the Holocaust and the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Every year, thousands of visitors, the majority of them young people, participate in our workshops teaching about the consequences of prejudice, racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia and xenophobia, and the dangers of indifference, apathy, and silence. At the center, we take responsibility for not only recalling historical events, but beyond that, by focusing our programs on values such as tolerance, respect, and good citizenship. As the primary focus of the Social Justice Café today, the lens today on the war between Hamas and Israel, let me turn to how it started. I feel personally challenged to confront the value of this work that I have devoted so much of my life to. The indescribable dehumanization of Jews on October the 7th, massacring people in their beds, including mutilating and murdering babies and young children, brutally raping women and kidnapping 240 people, some of whom have mercifully since been released, but well over 100 are still hostage in Gaza. And reminiscent of so much tragedy in history, there are many of us who, many people are looking on, a distressed number who celebrate it, and many who continue to justify it. I think that's part of the three different categories that you raised earlier, Tuli, of different people and the way people view it. Hamas went so far as to broadcast the images of these horrific crimes that they filmed in an ISIS-style attempt to further degrade their victims. It's depressing that there are those who don't understand why, for the Jewish state and for Jewish people across the world, the past is the present. Even more shocking is the horror of this attack has been willfully denied. The truth has been questioned again and again, silencing Jews even in the face of tragedy. The horrific consequences of this attack on the people of Gaza are wretched and heartbreaking. Precious children whose rights are human rights require our undivided attention. War is hell for everyone, but especially for children. And it is important to understand some of the unique elements of childhood trauma. I'll reference some points from what I believe is an excellent new book written by psychologist Tracy Farber together with Cora Smith and Gillian Eagle, called, the title is Catastrophic Grief, Trauma and Resilience in Child Concentration Camp Survivors. It explores the lives of 9 child or adolescent Holocaust concentration camp survivors as recollected when they were elders. The findings include unresolved grief contributed to a sense of existential loneliness, particularly prominent in their late life reflections. Despite indications of resilience and life productivity, the authors write of trauma trilogy, interlinking catastrophic grief, anger, and survivor guilt, which contributed to a sense of pain and struggle. This important publication reviews this trauma of child survivors and refers to psychological shrapnel. In other words, how children reprocess childhood trauma repeatedly at different stages of adulthood. For example, as a parent and then as a grandparent. This is particularly pertinent to the hostages in this conflict and the psychological torture of choosing who is freed, when they are freed, and separating families. it is essential to recognize long-term trauma and intervene as early as possible. Rebuilding after the war on both sides will require psychological services as well as physical health services. The best way to deal with trauma is to prevent it in the first place, and we must find a sustainable peace. This means releasing all the hostages in the first instance, making sure that the 7th of October can never happen again, and with its horrendous sequela for Israelis and Palestinians, recognizing each other's humanity, and I reference that Catherine mentioned humanity a lot in her speech, which is obviously the key to peace and the protection of children, is recognizing our shared humanity and establishing two states living securely and peacefully side by side. On the global stage, anti-Semitism has surged. In France and Germany, homes have been branded with the Star of David, people have been assaulted and murdered, and history has taught us that this further dehumanization doesn't end with Jews. A young Palestinian child was murdered in Chicago a few days after the 7th of October, and last weekend, 3 Palestinian students were shot. Although the authorities have not confirmed that this is a hate crime, it appears that way, at least to me. What of the work that I have passionately pursued for so long? Wasn't teaching about the Holocaust and genocide supposed to lead to educating people to be moral citizens? For years, we at the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Center have encouraged young people to think critically and to make positive choices every day in the way we speak to one another, because we understand clearly that words matter. What is even clearer for me now is to never underestimate the lethality of anti-Semitism and hatred. In my positive moments, I tell myself that we don't know where this world would be without our institutions, our teachers, our programs. I tell myself that it matters intrinsically to fight for justice and equity, for memory and understanding, for peace, compassion, and empathy, regardless of how much progress we see in our lifetimes. As Rabbi Abraham Herschel said, bad things happen for which we are not guilty, but that does not excuse us from responsibility. And so I'm grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to reflect on this place and mission of human beings on this earth, to think of our connection to that and those around us as a society, but also as a species. Thank you.
Thank you, Conique. That was Mary Klook speaking as a child of a Holocaust survivor and the founder and director of the Holocaust Center in Durban. I couldn't help but see that there are commonalities in the approach by Catherine and Mary. Both agree that children should not be harmed. Both agree that violence to children or around children subjects children to trauma that has repercussions beyond the experience. Both agree that war is hell. I like that quote. War is hell for everyone, but especially children. And both agree that the way we can stop war is by being moral citizens, all of us being moral citizens. And one of the things Mary also said is that the best way to deal with trauma is to prevent it. And in so doing, Mary referred to a psychology book that talks to the catastrophic impact of grief on children. Many would call that generational trauma. So there is common ground that wars should be avoided, but if it has to be fought, it has to be fought morally, and children should be protected. Mary also brought the issue of rehabilitation. How do we move forward now and ensure peace? And how do we learn from this what we seem not to have learned from the Holocaust? That genocide is wrong, and genocide has repercussions for society beyond what has happened. I think what might be one major difference between the two presentations is that Mary's understanding of the conflict is that it started on the 7th. Catherine's understanding of the conflict is that it starts 75 years ago, which is my understanding too. But as facilitator, I will not say anything on that until we've had the whole conversation, because it's important that we bring all of the context of it into it. That's why I started about how long have I been engaging with this matter, long before October 7th. Right. Can we now go to our colleague, Zubeida Jeffer? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you very much, Mary and Catherine, for your contribution. Similarly to you, Julie, I thought a lot about what my role should be when the latest conflict emerged on 7th of October. And I would say I too believe that this is a very long-standing and protracted conflict. Since I, as a young student at UCT, was already kind of aware of the issues and have been all my life. So I thought, what should I do? Because a few years ago, I was part of a human rights delegation and I visited Palestine and Israel, met with Israelis and with Palestinians. And after my visit there, I had also given a great deal of thought to what I'd seen and what my role should be. And I realized, Julie, that I have seen so much as a journalist. I've been through so much. I've covered the Rwandan genocide. I've been connected to following that country and visiting that country and writing about that country. And I have myself been a activist and a survivor of torture, and have had a child. I was pregnant with my child when the security police tried to kill her, wanted to give me a poison to kill my baby. So I just thought about it, and I thought, no, I will continue to support the Palestinian issue, but the Palestinian people, because Nelson Mandela had said we cannot be truly free until Palestine is free. But I cannot get myself further involved in this. It's just too traumatic. Because what I'd seen in Israel and Palestine shocked me. It shocked me beyond. I couldn't believe that there was a separate road for Israelis and a separate road for Palestinians. I couldn't believe that I had to go through all these checkpoints, and I couldn't move freely in Palestine. I couldn't believe that the Israelis that I spoke to had no clue that they were actually from my point of view, behaving exactly the way the minority white government had behaved in our country. And in fact, they were behaving in a worse way. And I say this with a lot of kindness because I don't wish bad things for them, because I know that they too have gone through all their traumas. So, but I also I can't be dishonest and say that, and not say what I saw and what I experienced from what professionals told me, and I've written about this, and what others have told me about what was happening to them. Their houses being bulldozed, losing entire double-story buildings in Tel Aviv. I mean, I was told that by doctors, by architects. So I decided I wasn't going to get involved with this anymore. I decided I will just, take a back seat. Then this happened, this latest event happened. And, I was really conflicted, and I prayed and I tried to make sense of it all. And eventually I stopped watching the images because I couldn't see that. I didn't want to see Israeli people hurt, nor did I want to see Palestinian people hurt. But when I saw the bombardment and the attacks against the Palestinians, and I saw the children and what they were saying, how they were crying, I think I was moved beyond a certain point. And I think that was for everybody. People were crying and, traumatized. I got phone calls all the time. Journalists were traumatized. And I think that I then had to decided that I wanted to pray each day for both the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I thought, I wonder if I can say this out publicly, because, it would be probably misunderstood. But I wasn't praying for both the Palestinians and the Israelis because I thought their actions were equal. I definitely, as with the South African government, the apartheid government, what they did was way beyond what any of us did. But I felt that I prayed and I said, Dear God, do the Israelis realize that they have got the power, they have got the capacity, they must find the heart to stop this? Because just as white South Africa had to come around, the Israelis must come around. I really do believe that. And of course, the Americans. But I really do believe that the Israeli public and the American public, especially, let's not get to Europe, but the Israeli public and the American public, they have to stand up in large numbers and say, we don't like this and we want this to stop because children are dying. And Mary, I have to say to you that I'm on the board of Columbia University, the journalism school, and there's been extensive discussion about this fact that babies were beheaded and all of this. I mean, Sky News was the only outfit that clearly stated that this was not true. And yet you've repeated that now here on this platform. Now, we also have to be very, very clear about demonizing people who are fighting for their freedom. And because we know how it was, we were demonized. And I was held as a terrorist in terms of the Terrorism Act. And as I said, I was pregnant with my child. And when, fortunately, change came sooner than, or came before she was too big. She was 5 years old when change came, and so I tried to keep a lot of things away from her. I tried to keep a lot of things, so that, because my passion then became, how do I ensure that I don't pass this on to my child? How do I ensure that I don't pass on my trauma to my child? Because for me, that was the most precious thing, that I didn't want her to know what happened to her father and to me. And not wanted to know, but not wanted to be hearing it all the time. And so I don't know to what extent I achieved that, because I do think she showed signs of trauma through her life. But I think she's a wonderful human being, and she's come through it. She got married this year, and the only thing I could think of, I saw her, I thought to myself, this child is alive and she has survived. There she is, this child that they wanted to kill. And I'm so, so, so thankful. And Mary, I would agree with you. It's very important, the words that we choose, the words that we say, the words that we use all the time, and how we talk about things is very, very crucial, because every single law, international law, protects us now. There's the UN, there's the laws, there's everything that protects a child. But why can this happen in this day and age, when all the laws are there? I think that is the crucial thing. And Catherine, we have to grapple with that all the instruments are there, but the instruments have failed us dismally in the last while. So I just feel that I hope that through our conversation, and also through raising these issues, I can also explain to some of those people who are watching this that or may help them understand why South Africans are so intense about this issue, and why South Africans support the Palestinians, because it's like watching a nightmare. It's watching things that we ourselves experienced. And we don't want this to be anybody to endure this. But Tuli, thank you very, very much. I don't want to go on for too long, because of course I can, share so much. But thank you for getting this conversation going. And we really, really pray and hope that we can find a way through this. And people also didn't think we in South Africa, they were running away from the country. They were doing all these things. They thought that I had activists coming to me and crying eyes out when Madiba was supposed to be released in 1986. And so the South African government took their warplanes and they went into neighboring Southern African countries, and they killed people, So they killed people, and then for 3 years after that, our organizations were smashed. Our 30,000 people were arrested and put in jail. All those things happened, And so we react very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zubeida. That was Zubeida Jaffer, giving us a perspective of somebody who was an activist during apartheid and saw the horror of being treated as less than human. And when protesting that, she was arrested, and the powers that be wanted to kill her child, and being grateful that that child didn't die, though affected by the trauma. Her life has been normalized. Zubeida has also taken us through her work in Palestine, that took her to Palestine and to Rwanda to see what it is like to live in the aftermath of genocide in Rwanda, and in Palestine and Israel to see the separate and hierarchical lives of Israelis and Palestinians. What I'm getting from Zubeida is that she is agreeing with Catherine Constantinides that we should be guided by our consciences, by our morality, about our desire to recognize others as humans, and our desire to be recognized as humans, and that in prosecuting our desires to be free, that has to be done in a manner that is consistent with international law and in a manner that respects the rights of children. Where I see a slight difference between Mary and Zubeida is, again, Zubeida sees the conflict as not being fundamentally about what happened on the 7th, the conflict being fundamentally about how can you have a two-state solution where both Israelis and Palestinians have equal human rights, equal freedoms, and the right to self-determination. I did not get whether Zubeida feels that what happened on the 7th was horrific and wrong, but I'm not going to delve into that. I did hear her saying in reporting about what happened on the 7th, we have to avoid propaganda that amplifies what happened with a view to manufacturing outrage. But I would like to believe that everyone in the room believes that what happened on the 7th should not happen to anybody if we agree that civilians are not collateral damage, if we agree that civilians anywhere in the world deserve what we believe we deserve as civilians, and therefore law should be respected and war should be fought with morality. But all three of our guest speakers have also taken us into the psychology of war, how this trauma creates hardened people. From Mary's side, she sees how people who were traumatized in the Holocaust are still struggling with that trauma, generational trauma. She also made us aware that the release of hostages itself might create trauma. What I would like to see, is there a common ground that the children of Gaza too have been experiencing trauma for all these years and have experienced heightened trauma since the 7th? And that trauma is not just being kidnapped. Many of them have been killed and they continue to be killed. Many of them see their parents being killed every day. And therefore, this narrative that trauma is going to impact on these generations on these children for generations, is an agreement among you, my panelists, that applies to every child, whether they're Israeli or Palestinian. None of them deserves to see the things they've seen. None of them deserves to experience the things they've experienced. And ours as civil society is then to look at what happened in our morality, which you all condemn, the lack of morality. What happened in our morality that has allowed this to happen? And what changes in our morality need to happen? Firstly, to heal this part of human history, and secondly, to go forward as better human beings, creating a better world. I'm going to give my panelists 2 minutes each to retake an issue that you want to take, or my comments, and then I go to the room. I know we're running out of time. I am going to ask for 10 minutes beyond 2 to the organizers of the event so that we end at 2:10 because we started a little late. I was waiting for people. Right. Any panelist who wants to retake a particular issue or respond to something? Mary, you have the floor now.
Thank you. Thank you, Zubeida. Thank you, Catherine. I did want to respond to your point, a couple of points, Zubeida. I was just in terms of the reference to propaganda, and I think Tuli's mentioned it and referenced that all of us do acknowledge that, and I know you did say that you didn't want to watch the images, and I don't blame you, of the massacring on the 7th of October and the subsequent, war, etc. But you obviously have subsequently been distressed by what is happening in Gaza. And my reference, and I just want to read it again, that people were massacred in their beds, literally. And when you mentioned the word pregnant, I thought of that Thai worker, a woman from Thailand who was engaged as a migrant laborer working in the south of Israel, or has please God, given birth as a hostage in Gaza. So I think it's fair to say that we all have to acknowledge that there's been terrible trauma and terrible massacring, certainly on the 7th of October, and the resultant war is awful. And I absolutely agree with you, Julie, that all children should not have to live with the trauma that they are going to have to live with, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. I'm unequivocal about that, whether they are Palestinian children living in Gaza or Israeli children or any other children living in Israel. I also wanted to reference a point that Catherine made, a very important point, that we in South Africa enjoy the freedom of expression and the opportunity to express ourselves in protest, which is something we should all celebrate every day. We live in a constitutional democracy that affords us the freedom to express ourselves. But I also want to make it clear that we need to be careful that these protests don't spill over, as did happen 10 days ago in Cape Town at a Christian prayer meeting on the promenade, that ended up having to be cancelled because of violence that erupted amongst opposing, if you use that word, opposing emotions on the street. And I think that protest and peaceful protest is a cornerstone of democracy. But it needs to be that people are not intimidated into thinking, well, we won't go and protest now because we're scared that the outcome will be negative, or that we will be endangering people who want to stand in peaceful protest. So I just wanted to reference that point, and to just agree with the panelists. And I think for me personally, to sit in this space and in this room, albeit virtual, is a privilege. We have much more in common than we would believe. We all want the same things. We all believe in peace. We want a peaceful outcome, and we should all pray together, in my view. Zubaida referenced prayer, and I believe that she's right. We should be praying for peace so that both Palestinian people and the Jewish state can live side by side in security. I mean, it reminded me when Zubaida was talking about checkpoints, and I think to myself, maybe if there'd been checkpoints, what would have happened on the 7th of October could have been avoided. God forbid, people just came in, from across the border. So I think all of us, we want a different world. And I'm hoping, as you said in your introductory remarks, Julie, referencing the Senegalese saying that we need to come out on the other side, but we need to come out in a different way. It needs to be a different world. Something shifted for me personally on the 7th of October, and for many people around the world. I know the reference to this absolutely complex challenge and complex conflict that has existed since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, but that something has to change. If we're going to live in peace, and we must find a way to live together side by side as peaceful friends and neighbors. That's what I believe.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a feeling that if the world leaders had women like you included at the peace table, things would go differently. And I know in Rwanda, when they were looking at the aftermath of war, they brought women to the peace table. And there was even a UN resolution, I think resolution 435, if I'm not mistaken, that required women to be part of the solution. Because to be honest, Mary, you've spoken about some Palestinians not wanting the state of Israel to exist. In Israel, the prime minister doesn't want the state of Palestine to exist. He has said so at the United Nations. He even offered a map that excludes Palestine. And there are various videos that have been shown of him before October 7, wanting an escalation of the conflict so that there would be no justification of a two-state solution. And let's face it, if Israel was sincere about a two-state solution, they wouldn't be increasing the settlements. And this is something I discussed with the ambassador to South Africa a few years ago. Lovely fellow, I think the name was Henk. What was his? And discussed if
maybe Arthur Link, the
Arthur
ambassador.
Link, yes, who
Yeah,
gave
the
me a
ambassador. He
lovely
was.
book.
We've had subsequently a couple of different ambassadors, but I do
Yes.
know Arthur.
It was Arthur Link, lovely human being, who even gave me a book about a startup nation. But I discussed this thing that if we're serious about a two-state solution, the stuff that we've heard from Zubeida and from Catherine about these settlements being declared and people being set up against each other by unleashing the settlers on the locals. And obviously that's creating animosity. And what hasn't been discussed in this room is that the tension has been going on with sometimes Palestinians being, Israelis being stabbed by a Palestinian randomly. So somebody who doesn't know what's going on would just think these people are crazy. They're going around stabbing people. But so this whole thing of these settlements, where Palestine has been going smaller, becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, reminds me of what happened in South Africa since 1896. Apart from what was taken away through war, just the law was kept being used to declare areas whites only and pushing the natives and those classified as colored and Indian, pushing them away and away and away. And of course, that created resentment. But on top of that, having these checkpoints where the rest of the world thinks there's two countries that are at war with each other, colleagues. The four of us know that it's not two countries. It is a territory that is currently under Israeli control. And therefore, it's not two countries that are fighting as equals. And that for me raises the question around, in those situations, how do people fight back after the government has struck at you before October 7? Clearly, you don't harm civilians. Clearly, you don't. I'm not going to debate whether people were raped or it's just all the trauma is unnecessary. Whether we agree on what it looked like, I believe that the four of us agree that civilians should not be collateral damage. But I hope that agreement extends to the civilians that have been harmed by the Israeli government should also not have been harmed by the Israeli government. Because if you're saying self-defense by the Israeli government says you can harm innocent civilians, then somebody would say, why should that law of the jungle not apply to Hamas?
Sorry, can I just interrupt there, Tuli? It makes me very uncomfortable that there's even a consideration in the room around the brutality of what happened on October the 7th. I mean, it's common cause, it would seem, the forensic evidence, and it sounds really crazy that we are even debating the brutality of what may or what occurred. And you know, I think that when you say that we're not sure about it, for me, rape is not resistance. Whatever way one wants to resist, one can't talk about rape being a form of resistance.
Can I respond to that, Mary? I have said it doesn't matter what the harm was. It was wrong. So I wasn't suggesting that if it's rape, then it's more wrong. Just for me, any harm to civilians is wrong. Whether it's rape, whether it's kidnap, whether it's being murdered, whether it's being starved to death, whether it's your hospitals being bombed, just all harm to civilians is inhuman, cruel, and wrong. So just get me right on that, is that I am saying I'm not going to, because here we have had assessments from Israel, assessments from Hamas and independent sources. I don't want us to be got bogged down on what was that cruelty like. We just are agreeing that cruelty is not right. Is that okay?
Yep.
That I think the UN says civilians are not a target, civilians are not collateral damage. And I think that would cover it. And it doesn't matter what it is. It just shouldn't be done to civilians.
May I please also make a remark if possible?
Yes, please. And then I'm going to ask you to read the questions and see if you can answer it. There are 2 questions or comments. Yes, we should go. Please
I will have a look
proceed.
at the question shortly. Thank you so much. I recently read something and I think it really resonates and I really want to share it with the audience now this afternoon. I think that, again, I stand on the side of humanity and I think everything that has happened, we have to continually ask ourselves, what kind of human beings do we want to be? I read this and this is what I'd like to share. 15 things that you should never have to say to a country. Stop bombing children. Don't kill journalists. Don't bomb hospitals. Don't shoot patients through their hospital windows. Don't drive bulldozers over dead bodies. Don't bomb ambulances. Don't do ethnic cleansing. Don't call human beings animals. Don't starve people. Don't cut off people's water. Don't cut off electricity at hospitals, killing the ICU and NICU patients. Don't bomb doctors. Don't bomb UN staff. Don't do apartheid. And let us stop lying constantly. And I share that because I think that resonates and really sums up all of the conversation that is had today. I agree with Mary. I am grateful for the opportunity of this platform and engagement. And I really, really, I listened to each of the panelists and to yourself, Prof. Madonsela, and it is so important to have this robust kind of conversation. And it's something that we briefly chatted about yesterday because there has been a lot of heightened temperament around today's discussion. But I think it is crucially important that we stand on the shoulders of the great giants who liberated us and allow for us to have the freedoms that we have today, and that we continue to stand to fight for justice, to fight for humanity, and to fight for human rights as a reality that each and every one of us sees actioned, where every human being is equal, not some human beings are more equal than others.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. I stand on the side of humanity, and I get a sense that all 3 of you stand on the side of humanity. It's just a question of what is the detail on what does that equality look like? Zubeida? Please unmute yourself, ma'am.
I see Lerato has asked me a question
Yes.
about, let's see, what is the question? Julie, can you see it?
Yes. How do we remain hopeful and continue protesting when it feels like no one is listening and it's not making an impact? How do you keep going?
Lerato, I want to tell you a little story. I think I mentioned in 1986, when we were all expecting Madiba to be released and the negotiations to start. It was January 1986. So what P.W. Botha and the South African apartheid government did, instead of releasing Mandela and starting the negotiations, they sent planes into the neighboring countries and bombed what they said were ANC houses and killed a lot of people. And we knew immediately then that that meant that there was going to be no negotiations and Mandela was going to be released then. And when this activist came to me and she said, she cried and she said, you know, people are not going to come out of prison, people, because we had a lot of people in prison, people are not going to come from exile, Mandela's not going to be released, he's going to die there, and we're not going to have a negotiated settlement. And I thank God to this day that I said to her, no, you must stop crying now, stop crying, because I can tell you with great certainty, and I really believe that. I said to her, this is 1986, I said to her, Madiba is going to be released. The exiles are coming home. Our chaps in the prisons are going to come, all our people are going to come home. And are going to come out of the prisons. And there's going to be a non-racial democratic election. And so she stopped crying and she said to me, what do you mean? So I said, I'm telling you, just as I believe now that this Palestine-Israeli thing is going to be settled, I said to her, I'm telling you this is going to happen. The only problem I have, I can't tell you when. So I'm telling you it's going to happen, I can't tell you when. In other words, I was saying to her, we mustn't, my view is this now, with all the challenges we have in our country, there are people who want to run away, there are people who think Cape Town is better than other places, which it's not, and there are people, all sorts of things. Then, when we've solved the problems, when we've worked our butts off, then they want to come rushing back, okay? So we are going to do the work, we are doing the work in trying to tackle all these difficult things, and we're going to stay, we're going to keep the focus, Lerato. You have to keep the focus. As soon as you give up on that, then it means you have been defeated, your mind has been defeated. They've taken over your mind, they've colonized your mind, and I refuse to do that. I'm not going to let my mind be colonized. There's just too many people who have died, too many people who have gone through such hardship. And so we are going to see what we fought for, even if it's going to take us many, many years.
Lerata says, thank you. I will not give up hope.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to say to you, because I mean, this is new to me. Watching this unfold has been incredibly traumatic. I think most of us are crying every day. So we've been protesting, we're trying to boycott, and I mean, it's only been 2 months. And I'm like, as a baby protester, I'm clearly not very resilient and don't have stamina yet, but you've given me hope, and I will keep holding on.
Thank you so much. But I'm going to have 2 questions for you that you will address. One of them is just about having conversations like this. Are we having enough of them, or should we have more of them? We may not reach full common ground in one day, but we could increase that common ground. So Mbuso Bantu says the Holocaust, Mbuso Bantu, I must confess that I know Mbuso Bantu, Madam Sela, and that should give you a clue. He says, in the beginning of the Nazi regime, the world turned a blind eye to the treatment of Jewish people by the Nazi regime. By the time of the Holocaust, it was too little, too late. Internationally, we need to have consensus whether or not Israel is an apartheid state. It is incredibly difficult to find solutions to a problem unless we are able to identify the root causes and weed them out. Do we have a consensus on this? That's Mbuso Bantu's question. Any takers?
I think for another time, Tuli, it'll take. I don't know.
I don't believe that what happened and as a middle-aged white South African, I'm ashamed of what happened in this country. when I was growing up. But I don't believe that what's the challenges in Israel, and it's not perfect. It's also a functioning democracy that is up for criticism, and God knows that so many Israelis, you've seen for the last 6 months, the protests every week on the streets of Israel in terms of the challenges that they're confronting with the dissatisfaction with their government or not, etc. So, but I don't believe it's apartheid. So in terms of consensus, I believe there are challenges. I believe things need to change, but I don't believe it's apartheid.
Right. Any takers? Catherine, Catherine, you identified the different lives of Israelis and Palestinians in Israel, and so did Zubeida. I think the question is that enough to qualify for the definition of apartheid in the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, I said. But Zubeida said you don't want to comment, and I do agree with you that we need to have a different conversation of what is an apartheid state, and what are the commonalities between Israel and South Africa, what are the differences, but what is the international law definition of apartheid, and is that happening? But I can be sure that nobody in this room can say living in Israel or in Palestine, being Black, or being Palestinian and being Israeli, you get the same treatment and the same human rights. I hope nobody will say that the quality of life is the same for those two groups without going into the detail.
I agree with you. An entire conversation needs to be had. A robust discussion with regards to that is very important, and it's doing it an injustice to quickly try to make comment on that now specifically. Okay. I would like to say,
I think it's a simplistic analysis, and I think that, as you say, a fuller conversation is. Sorry to interrupt you, Catherine.
No problem at all. So I agree with that very much so. But what I did want to say is that just off of the tail end of what was previously said is that, you know, I'm a child that grew up in a South Africa that had freedom because of people that fought for our freedom. I'm a child that grew up in a new South Africa, as it's been called. But I'm also a woman who has worked in conflict areas where occupation currently takes place. And so my understanding of occupation and colonization is very real, because for the past 10 years, I've lived on the ground with Sahrawis who are living under very oppressive occupation. And what I know and have seen firsthand is quite horrific and traumatizing. But I carry the strength of the Sahrawis with me, and I carry these stories, the stories of people who are under brutal violation of their basic human rights. But what I wanted to say is, as a child of a South Africa that is so-called free, we still have an immense responsibility to fight for our human rights every single day, and to continue to fight for justice and to hold justice at the center and the pinnacle of our very communities. Those communities start from where we live, the people we live next door to, across the road from, the streets that we live on as a community. It's the shared spaces we have at work, at play, when we go out on a weekend, when we're going to sports activities with our children. We need to constantly be defining what it is to share humanity. Just because we have a functioning democracy does not equate to all of our people having the freedoms that they so deserve. And those freedoms, as enshrined in our Constitution, need to constantly be fought for. And I think when we focus in on South Africa and we focus and understand on how important it is to constantly fight for those human rights, to constantly fight for freedom, for justice, making sure that we're active citizens where we are, then we are able to truly understand the reality of the world that we currently live in. We live, unfortunately, in a world that is in a dark place, where leadership is unfortunately not what it needs to be. But as citizens, and back to the initial conversation, it's important for us to understand the role of civil society when we're fighting for those very human rights, when we're talking about children and ensuring that each and every day our children's rights are protected. And as civil society, we're doing all that we can from where we are. We don't need to have a corner office or a fancy title in an NGO or an organization. We need to bring different parts of civil society together, as Professor Madonsela, you have done so beautifully today. And I, again, thank you for the honor and the privilege to have had this discussion and be a part of it. But it is a job that is never done. That fight for justice is a constant one. We see so much that happens on the ground here at home. We need to constantly be fighting, be focused, and constantly question ourselves. What is our value system? Who are we as a people? And how do we constantly ensure that humanity is never forgotten and never traded against anything?
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. And regarding the issue of apartheid, I think we'll not accept that it deserves another conversation and accept that there are complexities that need to be discussed. But the principle is accepted in the room that all humans deserve equal rights, equal opportunities, equal dignity, and equal respect. And that is the essence of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But Catherine is also saying for those human rights to be given expression, we have to be better human beings that give expression to those human rights. And again, that was the message from Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, for those human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to be the basis for ending wars and preventing future wars, rights and justice would have to be experienced in little spaces, such as workplaces, homes, markets, all of the places where humans interact. And of course, governments, to prevent the politics of resentment, need to treat everyone fairly and justly. Tessa has had their hand up, and Tessa, you're going to have the last word before our panelists give us their closing addresses. Thank you. Please unmute yourself, ma'am. Ma'am, we haven't heard a word. Please start from the beginning and unmute. Yes, ma'am.
Many thanks to you, Prof. Madonsela and Mary and Catherine and Zubeida. I really, in all this last few months, I haven't seen women coming to the table, and I've really missed that it's men that are making the decisions, and it would, I think, be big steps towards peace if women were more at the table. I just wanted to say a few things. I feel sitting here that I have to take a side. I work with children and parents, and I work in schoolyards with boys fighting. And I think from a young age, we're forced to choose a side, and we're forced to blame a side. And I kind of want to hold out of a perspective of what if we chose both people? And what if both people were right and both people were wrong? The emotions are so high at the moment. And Mary, when you said the past is the present, it's really encapsulates the past has been triggered in the present. And we all come to the present with past hurts. And like Zubeida said, the present, we're watching this as if it was South Africa, and our emotions from the past are being triggered in the present. And that the emotions are not a good guide to actions and policies. Making decisions based on emotions is not going to be a good policy or a good decision. And we need the safety to tell our stories and be listened to so that we can think better about what the correct policies are. And I think we have to admit to our mistakes and apologize. There's anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Arab racism, and there's anti-Semitism. You know, I think it was Yuval Harari that said, both people are oppressed and both people are oppressors. And we're trying to fight to be the bigger victim. Or in the both wrongs and rights on both sides. And I think blaming doesn't solve the problem. The problem is, how do we move forward based on, we need to have peace and we need to have security. Yeah, I think I just wanted to say that the organization standing together in Israel is such an, if you Google them, Israeli Palestinians and Jewish Israelis standing together. And you know what they say, they're young adults, and they, you know, they go to America and they say, you're causing too much problems for us in Israel. You know, the problems, shouting about who did right and who did wrong and who killed more and who didn't and who's the bigger victim, is not solving the problem. The problem needs to be solved with the people based on what do we do moving forward, and not who did what before today. I don't know if that's a useful perspective, but I felt I needed to say something.
That is a very useful perspective, Tessa, and I would like our panelists to reflect on that perspective and to give their closing comments. I did indicate when I started that there are three camps in response to what's happening in Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. There are those that say whatever the Israeli government is doing is right. And there are those who think whatever Hamas or anybody else who's doing in fighting back is right. And there are those that are saying there are rights and wrongs from both sides. But the problem lies in how the settlement has been handled in the last 75 years, which means, therefore, the problem does not start on the 7th of October, but the 7th of October escalated a problem that has been right in front of us for all these years. And Reina of Jordan had warned us 7 days earlier that we need to awaken to what's happening there and do something in the interest of humanity and peace. Now, can we have closing remarks from all panelists in the order in which you appeared? So we're going to start with our keynote, Catherine Constantinides, then Mary, and then we'll end with Zubeida. Over to you, Ms. Constantinides.
Thank you so much. So I would just like to once again just say thank you to those, not only to my fellow panelists, but also Prof, to you, your team, and the people behind the scenes that made today happen. Thank you also to those who have listened to this. I really would encourage everyone to perhaps share this. I'm assuming that this discussion will be shared and available, and I'd ask for people to share that widely. It is important for us to create safe spaces to have difficult discussions. And Prof, you asked earlier, should we be doing more of this? Absolutely. This is how we move forward. This is how we find common ground. And I would encourage everyone who's listening, my closing remark really would be, once again, to drive home. Let us not ask ourselves what kind of world we want to live in, but let us ask ourselves what kind of human beings we want to be. And let us be the best version of those human beings in order to tackle the greatest challenges of this moment in time, where history is being written, and we will have to look back and ask ourselves, what did we do, and how in this moment in history did we engage, have robust discussion, have an opportunity to truly understand one another. And it doesn't mean we have to always agree, but we have to respectfully engage in order to move forward. once again, thank you for the opportunity and the privilege. And let us continue perhaps on social media for those who are listening. You can find, I'm sure all of us, I know Prof did tweet out yesterday details on today's discussion, and I think we're all captured on that tweet. Please do engage us if there are other questions. Let us continue to have respectful discussion and engagement that allows us each to understand the different perspectives and the reality that we all come from. And let us move forward, because this is a dark moment in history and history is writing itself. This will be a scar on the conscience of this very generation.
Thank you. No need for a summary. That was an excellent summary on its own. Miss Mary Klook.
Thank you. Thanks, Tuli, and thanks again for this opportunity. I wanted to actually reference the very important remarks made by Tessa. I agree wholeheartedly that we have to find a way forward. And there's, you know, if we're going into an analysis of who's right, who's wrong, etc., it's very difficult to move forward. But I do want to add that there is an enormous amount of emotion and a lot of pain experienced, and each one of the panelists expressed the pain, including some of the people in the room who spoke about the trauma that people are feeling. And I think that for me, possibly these spaces and this conversation and this respectful environment is a place to heal some of that pain. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Zubaida, excellent summary again.
Thank you very much, everybody. Truly for putting this together, your team, and for my fellow panelists. When I was preparing for this talk, I made a note to say that no conflict is insurmountable if there is a genuine commitment to understanding, forgiveness, and collaboration. So history shows us that. It's just from our own experience in South Africa and in many, many historical reasons, experiences, we have seen that it is possible to resolve an issue if there's sufficient commitment on both sides. So I would like to see that we fight for that we fight for an immediate ceasefire, and that we argue for people to be committed to genuine, collaborating genuinely. I'm not sure how we're going to do that whilst we have the arms industry and whilst we have people who want to, you know, line their pockets as best they can, but we should fight for that nonetheless. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our amazing panelists who have been insightful, considerate, and visionary in taking us through what's happening in Israel, Palestine, since October 7 and before October 7. I believe we've had a very thoughtful conversation that lays a basis for further conversations around this matter. What our panelists have emphasized is the importance of centering children and making sure that they're sheltered, not only because it's a human right, but they need to be sheltered because they are the seeds of society. And if we poison the lives of children, we're poisoning society at its foundation. And our colleagues have suggested that more of these conversations need to take place. And that such conversations should be curated in a manner that is calm, respectful, and allows each party to express their views with a view to finding common ground. When I started, I quoted a Senegalese proverb that says, what leads you to darkness can also teach you how to come out on the other side. The Palestinian-Israeli question has led us to darkness for 75 years. But it does seem that if there's willingness for each side to humanize the other, and that if all concerned are prepared to be the human beings they need to be to create a better world, we can fix not only what's happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but in other conflicts in the world. But our guests have also reminded us of the impact of trauma, that whatever has happened, there will have to be a healing process. And for me, that takes me to a book written by Helene Opperman Lewis called Apartheid, the Bastard. The book is called Apartheid, Britain's Bastard Child. It explains what's happening in Israel, Palestine. It explains what happened in South Africa. It explains what's happening in China. And it's all about trauma that has not been remedied. And I think Tessa has brought this to the fore, that there has been excesses on both sides. And in some way, both sides are right and wrong. And the question going forward is, how do we then find the common ground that we found today and leverage it as a basis for resolving those matters we were still apart? South Africa was built ultimately on negotiations. Yes, the traumas of the past have not been fully dealt with, but negotiations made a huge difference. I believe that as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. That anti-Semitism, whether in its fullness of being just anti-Semites, Arabs, Jews, etc., or in its narrow form where it's anti-Jew, is going to rise unless people like these good women in this room stand up and say, let us not attack the people. Let us attack the problem. And let's not attack the problem in ways that dehumanize anyone. Let us deal with the problem in ways where we are already the citizens of the world we want to live in. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. We will do our best to continue the conversation. Blessings to everyone. Thank you to CBC for bringing us all together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Subeda. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you all. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Prof, thank you so much for the opportunity and the privilege to have this platform with you.
Yeah.